It was Christmas Eve, but for Sarah, 32, it felt like another cold and lonely night as a snowstorm raged outside, the wind howling like an angry beast. Thick flakes falling in heavy curtains that engulfed the small northern town where Sarah, marked by a difficult past, bore the scars of a life that had not spared her. Once a respected accountant, she had been imprisoned for 6 months for a fraud she did not commit, losing her career, her friends, and her reputation. And after her release, she had given up everything to settle in this remote area, transforming a dilapidated building into a refuge named the Haven, a place for those whom the world had forgotten. Where that night, only 4 residents were present: 2 men sleeping in the common room, an elderly woman reading by candlelight, and a teenager wrapped in a blanket, watching the snow through a cracked window. When a violent knock at the front door startled Sarah, who, her heart racing, grabbed a poker near the fireplace and approached cautiously, opening the door to discover a trembling young man. His wet hair plastered to his forehead, blood trickling from a cut above his brow, his once expensive overcoat torn, his leather gloves stiff with frost, and his pleading eyes fixed on her in despair. "I don't have time to explain. I can't call the police. They're already looking for me, but I haven't done anything wrong." To which Sarah, tightening her grip on the poker, replied in a calm voice, "You're shaking in the snow and talking about justice. Come in. If you're a bad man, I'll be the first to know," letting him stumble inside, nearly collapsing. Before locking the door and settling him by the fireplace, where she gave him a blanket and a cup of hot tea, then went to fetch a first aid kit, discovering under his coat a torn designer suit and scuffed polished leather shoes, cleaning his wound before asking his name. To which he replied after a hesitation, Thomas Whitaker, a name Sarah recognized from the headlines. Whitaker, a dynasty of tech moguls, but she remained silent, simply saying, "You're lucky I left the porch light on. Rest, no questions tonight." Sarah assigned Thomas a small room at the back of the shelter, without a lock, specifying that she kept a bat near her bed, a barely veiled warning, and Thomas gave a weak, almost incredulous smile, murmuring a thank you before she brought him dry clothes and food. As she walked away, she glanced back, seeing him staring at the fire with eyes haunted by a pain she recognized, that of deep betrayal, similar to what she had known years before. She understood that he was not an ordinary fugitive, for who would flee a snowstorm in a suit worth more than his car? Yet, despite her own scars, Sarah still believed in offering one last chance. In the following days, Thomas remained discreet, spending most of his time in his room, only emerging for meals that he took quickly before retreating, walking with hunched shoulders as if to make himself invisible, always sitting with his back to the wall, his eyes constantly scanning the room, windows, doors, unfamiliar faces, as if anticipating danger. He spoke politely in a calm tone that inspired trust, but revealed nothing personal, contenting himself with thank you and helpful remarks. Yet, beneath this reserved facade, there was undeniable humanity. One morning, Sarah found him on a ladder in the hallway, fixing a flickering bulb that had been bothering her for weeks. Another day, he spent 2 hours repairing a leaking faucet in the kitchen, and when the old generator of the shelter sputtered during a cold snap, he got it running again in 30 minutes, winning the affection of the residents who appreciated that he never acted condescendingly. Helping fold laundry without being asked, offering his share of food to the elderly, and even giving his coat to a soaked and frozen newcomer. But Sarah saw beyond his kindness, noting the precision with which he consulted the generator manual, his technical vocabulary on circuits and wiring. One evening, as he glanced at his computer screen, he murmured, "This spreadsheet has a formula error in column F. The total is off by 6 cents, revealing that he was not just educated, but experienced and precise, his silence about his past becoming deafening. Until one night, while Sarah sorted through donation receipts in her office. Sarah got up, her heart racing, and approached Thomas's door, gently knocking before opening it, finding him tangled in his blanket, sweat soaking his forehead, his face twisted in anguish. She softly said, "Thomas, you're having a nightmare. It's nothing, wake up," which made him sit up abruptly, gasping, his eyes wide and wild, before slowly focusing on her, murmuring, "Sarah, I'm sorry, I—" She calmly replied, "You are screaming names, Nicole Allen," her hands trembling as he ran his fingers through his hair, saying, "Yeah, sorry, I should sleep somewhere else." But Sarah firmly cut in, "You're fine where you are, everyone is ghosts. Yours are just a bit louder than average." Thomas looked at her, visibly weighing whether to speak, before finally saying, "I don't want to cause trouble," to which Sarah nodded, "I know," not pressing him further. But before leaving, she paused at the door and added, "Thomas, whatever you do, know that you don't have to run away alone forever." He didn't respond, but as she walked away, he murmured a nearly broken "thank you," and in that moment, Sarah understood that Thomas wasn't just running from someone, but from a version of himself that had believed in people like Nicole and Alan, a part of him still wanting to believe in someone. On the third day, the snow had stopped, but the cold lingered, biting. Sarah sat by the fire, sorting through repair bills, her eyes heavy with fatigue, worrying about the silence from Thomas, who hadn't left his room all day. She crossed the hallway to knock on his door, hearing his voice reply, "It's open," and finding him sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, hands clasped, jaw clenched, declaring, "I need to tell you who I am." Sarah sat across from him, waiting, and he revealed, "My name is Thomas Whitaker. I was the CEO of Whitaker Dynamics," a name that resonated like a weight. Everyone knew Whitaker Dynamics, a tech empire, an old money family, famous for its scandals. He continued, "I took over the company after my father's death. Too young, they said, but I grew it, improved it, then I got engaged to Nicole Harper. She runs a media startup. Everyone called us the golden couple." Thomas stopped, his eyes locked onto Sarah's, and continued, "If I had married Nicole, she would have had legal access to our joint assets. They timed everything, contracts, media coverage, to make it all collapse after the wedding, turning me into a scapegoat. They even leaked false evidence, emails, documents. Suddenly, I was the villain." Sarah asked, "Why not go to the authorities?" He replied, "I tried, but Alan had someone on the inside. An internal investigation was opened, but the fabricated evidence overwhelmed me. I was finished if I stayed, so I fled. I had no choice. I had to disappear, understand what they had done, and find proof before they completely destroyed me." The fire crackled softly in the main room, breaking the silence that followed. Sarah spoke, her voice steady yet imbued with rare gravity. "I lost everything one day, too." Thomas stared at her, waiting, and she continued, "I was a corporate accountant. Someone embezzled from the company. I reported it and they framed me. They used my ID, doctored the numbers. I was arrested in front of everyone. I spent 6 months in prison, without trial. No one believed me. When I got out, I left everything behind and came here. I built this place with what little I had left." Pausing, her eyes meeting his, Thomas murmured, "I'm sorry," but she shook her head. "Don't be. It made me stronger, and if I ever have the chance to pull someone else out of that darkness, I will." Rising, her voice firm, "You're not alone in this, Thomas. If you're ready to fight, I'm with you, not out of pity, but because I know what it's like to lose everything and still want to believe in something worth saving." Thomas's expression cracked slightly, not from pain or fear, but from an emotion close to trust, saying, "I don't know what comes next." Sarah replied, "Neither do I, but we'll figure it out together." By the end of the week, the refuge felt warmer, not only because of the heating system Thomas had repaired, but also due to a subtle change between him and Sarah, the tension in his voice softening. Sarah nodded and brought her old laptop closer, saying, "Let's start with this," and they created a new email address under a false identity, used a virtual private network, and drafted a coded message, Sarah checking each line before sending it. Explaining with a slight smile, I used to do this kind of thing for my clients, not illegal stuff, just making sure everything was airtight. And Thomas looked at her. You were really good at your job, weren't you? To which she replied after a moment, nodding, Yes, I was. And in the following days, Sarah and Thomas worked side by side, fixing shelves, reorganizing food stock, and repainting a graffiti-covered wall in the alley behind the shelter, forming an unlikely team, the fallen tech mogul and the accountant turned shelter manager. But it worked. And one afternoon, Sarah drove them into town to restock supplies at a small local market, Thomas pushing the cart while she read her list, bickering over peanut butter brands, laughing when he knocked over a stack of canned goods. And even stopping for coffee at a small bistro on the corner, where no one recognized Thomas, who wore a beanie pulled down over his forehead and kept his head low, appearing to the outside world as just a regular guy helping a friend. And back at the shelter, unloading the groceries, Sarah shared part of her story that she rarely revealed. It happened on a Thursday, she said, wiping her hands on her jeans. I was checking quarterly reports. Something was off. I followed the trail, reported the issue to the CFO, Thomas listening in silence. And she continued. 2 days later, security escorted me out of the office, handcuffed in front of everyone. The numbers had been rigged, and all the evidence pointed to me. Even my ID had been used. And to Thomas's question, You didn't fight back? She replied, I tried, but the real thief knew the system better than I did. My lawyer told me I could either stay quiet and take the blame, or risk years of litigation and a heavier sentence. I took the deal. And Thomas clenched his jaw. You didn't do anything wrong, but she replied, I know that now. A few days later, Thomas and Sarah were preparing for a risky mission. Thomas, knowing that to prove his innocence, he had to retrieve tangible evidence, emails, signed documents, and transaction logs stored on the backup servers of Whittaker Dynamics, located in the second basement of the company building, an imposing structure of glass and steel where the Whittaker Dynamics logo shone with a cold blue light. It was past midnight, the city silent under a layer of snow, the parking lot almost deserted, Thomas adjusting his cap and looking at Sarah, who wore a dark hoodie, oversized glasses, and a determined expression, whispering to him, Are you sure? She nodded. Caroline said the evidence is there. If we retrieve it and get out without being spotted, we can prove everything. They entered through a maintenance door, the code still fresh in Thomas's mind from his days as CEO, a code that, to his relief, hadn't changed. The door clicked open, revealing a dark corridor that smelled of cold air and cleaning products, Thomas moving forward, his steps light yet assured, every nerve on edge, the corridors strangely silent, security lights flickering above them, casting long shadows, avoiding the elevator, too risky due to the cameras, to descend a narrow staircase to the server level, each step seeming to plunge them deeper into the life Thomas had left behind. Upon reaching the server room, Sarah pulled out an encrypted USB drive provided by Caroline's team. Plug this into the main terminal. It will copy everything and send the data to a secure cloud. Thomas opened the panel, typing quickly, his fingers instinctively finding the commands of a system he had designed himself, the screen lighting up, the data transfer beginning, and he said, breathless, We need to hold for 6 minutes, then we're in the clear. But before Sarah could respond, an alarm blared, a discreet yet sharp beep that intensified, and Thomas froze. Motion sensor. Someone triggered it upstairs. A voice crackled through the intercom. Unidentified activity detected in basement 2. Security teams, deploy immediately. And Sarah's eyes widened. We have to go. Sarah and Thomas were running down the alley behind the Whittaker Dynamics building, their breaths visible in the frigid air, their hearts pounding wildly, a tall wall rising before them, blocking their escape. Sarah crouched down and said, I can give you a boost, go ahead. But Thomas insisted, No, you go first. She insisted in turn, making him place a foot on her joined hands, jumping to grab the top of the wall, hoisting himself up, then reaching down to pull Sarah just as footsteps echoed behind them, falling over the other side, stumbling into the shadows. and continuing to run until the city swallowed the sounds of their pursuers. They finally took refuge in an old abandoned maintenance shed behind a train depot, Thomas leaning against the wall, panting, blood staining his sleeve, and Sarah exclaimed, her voice tinged with worry, "You're hurt." He grimaced, "It's nothing, just a scratch," but she tore the fabric to examine the wound, a shallow cut, already beginning to clot, but one that would leave a scar, whispering, "Idiot," as she wrapped her scarf around his arm. Thomas replied with a smile despite the pain, "Yeah, but we have the files." Sarah nodded, then sat beside him on the concrete floor, a silence settling in, charged with a new tension. Thomas said softly, "You didn't have to come," and Sarah retorted, "And you didn't have to protect me when that car came at us," looking at each other, really, and in that moment, something changed. The trust they had built over the days transforming into a deeper connection, something unspoken yet undeniable. Thomas murmured, "I don't know what this is, but I know I haven't felt this way in a long time," as Sarah reached out, her fingers brushing against his. "So don't run from it." And he didn't. 2 nights later, in the refuge's office, Thomas sat in a corner, staring at a silent phone, a single lamp illuminating the room, casting shadows on the desk where Sarah adjusted the audio settings of a computer for the 3rd time. Sarah asked without looking up, "Do you really think she'll take the bait?" Thomas replied, "She will. Nicole is too ambitious to give up power." Earlier that day, Sarah had contacted an old acquaintance, Lena Foster, an independent investigative journalist known for taking down corporate giants, who had agreed to meet them, but on one condition: concrete evidence. So, Sarah and Thomas had devised a plan. Now, in the calm of the office, Thomas took a deep breath and dialed Nicole's number on a prepaid phone, Sarah starting the recording. The phone rang once, twice, then Nicole answered, her voice soft and assured like silk. "Thomas," and he let out a trembling sigh, playing his role perfectly. "Nicole, listen. I made a mistake disappearing like that. I shouldn't have run away." A silence followed, then a cautious curiosity from her. "Where are you?" Thomas replied, "I can't tell you, but I want to make things right. I know I can't undo what happened, but I don't want to fight anymore. I've thought about it. Maybe you and Alan were right." Another pause, then Nicole's tone changed, becoming confident, intrigued. "Go on." Thomas continued, "I have the documents you fabricated. I know what you did, but I also know how to make them disappear. We can move forward together if you want me back." The line remained silent for a moment, Sarah glancing at the screen. The recording was clear, and finally Nicole responded, her voice low and cunning. "You're finally starting to think smart, Thomas. We can make all this go away. Alan has already adjusted the timelines. The audits will match. All we need is your cooperation." Thomas said, "I want to come back. Tell Alan I'll play the game. I'll even make a statement saying it was a misunderstanding, that I panicked." Sarah clenched her fists under the desk, holding her breath, and Nicole replied, "Good. We just needed you to understand who really has control. Come back discreetly, and everything disappears." Thomas added, "I'll need a few days to set everything up." Nicole, in a syrupy tone, said, "No problem, don't disappear again." The line cut off, Thomas staring at the phone, heart racing. "We got them," and Sarah was already copying the file onto a USB drive, her hands steady. Every word, it's all there, and an hour later. The next day, Lena's presentation hit like a bombshell, the story spreading like wildfire on the internet, picked up by all major media outlets with a direct, brutal headline. "A billionaire CEO trapped by his fiancée and legal partner. A secret recording reveals massive corporate betrayal." The article included audio excerpts, document snapshots, and a timeline of the fraudulent scheme. Lena's voice, clear and unwavering, narrating the exposé, exposing Nicole Harper and Alan Royce for what they truly were. The public reaction was immediate and visceral. Nicole's face, Once the darling of business magazines and influencer circles, appearing on screens accompanied by words like fraud, manipulative, and arrest warrant. Alan Royce was also named, both officially becoming fugitives with federal charges including wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. The Justice Department confirmed the validity of the evidence and issued arrest warrants that day, while Thomas Whitaker's name transitioned from scandal-ridden CEO to whistleblower and survivor, headlines praising his courage for days. Thomas Whitaker clears his name in stunning turnaround. The fallen tech heir redeems himself with his exposé, the man who gave up power for truth. But Thomas remained silent, reading the articles, watching the interviews, listening to legal experts dissect the layers of betrayal, yet staying inside the refuge, beside the woman who had saved his life when the world had turned its back on him. Soon, the press knocked at the door, Caroline Mendes, his trusted lawyer, organizing a formal press conference to clarify matters directly, publicly, inviting Sarah, gently encouraging her to attend, and Thomas himself asking her the night before, as they stood outside under a cold sky, the stars barely visible above the city's glow. "You should be there," he said softly. "You were there when no one else was." But Sarah slowly shook her head. "I was also there when the cameras distorted the truth and turned me into the villain. I'm done with the spotlight, Thomas. I don't need the world to know who I am. I just want to live a life that is true." A year after Thomas, the fugitive billionaire, found refuge with Sarah, their lives had changed but remained rooted in their shared values. During a Christmas celebration at a community center, the scent of cinnamon and baked bread filled the air, children's laughter echoed, and twinkling lights adorned the windows, contrasting with the falling snow outside. Sarah, now the financial director of Haven Project, a nonprofit founded by Thomas after leaving Whitaker Dynamics, was helping a boy serve himself mashed potatoes. Wearing a green sweater and a star pendant, while Thomas, having traded million-dollar contracts for work boots, distributed coats and repaired heaters. Finding simple joy in this new life, far from penthouses, and staying by Sarah's side with a true sense of purpose. That evening, at their first Christmas party for the residents of the 6 shelters they had created, 200 people shared laughter and healing, and Thomas found Sarah near the stage, taking her hand to lead her outside into the snow, where he pulled out a box containing a silver ring engraved with rooftops and stars, saying, "This is not an engagement ring. It's a promise that I will stay no matter what. I won't run away." Sarah moved, slid the ring onto her finger, whispering, "You're ridiculous," but intertwining their fingers. Under the restored bells, rung by a little girl, they embraced, Sarah resting her head against his chest, 2 souls cast aside by the world, united by a love born of truth and resilience, proving that true love endures through it all. In this refuge of second chances where their happiness, imperfect yet real, shone under the stars.